The air in room 307 of Oakwood General Hospital was always still, thick with the sterile scent of antiseptic and the low rhythmic sigh of the ventilator. It was a space suspended in time, dominated by the silent form of David Reed, a man caught between life and whatever comes after. A week had passed since his car had skidded off the rain-slicked I-95, a week of silent vigils held by his mother Eleanor, a woman whose face seemed to have aged a decade in 7 days, and his younger sister, Chloe, whose eyes were permanently red-rimmed and swollen. The doctors used words like medically induced coma and traumatic brain injury, their tones carefully neutral, a practiced balance of hope and realism. But for Eleanor and Chloe, the language was simpler, more brutal, a nightmare. It was on the third night that Chloe first heard the voice. She'd been dozing fitfully in the uncomfortable recliner by the window, her hand clutching David's limp one. A whisper, so faint it could have been the rustle of the air conditioning, tugged her from the edge of sleep. Her eyes fluttered open. The room was dim, lit only by the soft glow of the heart monitor. David was, of course, unchanged. But the whisper came again, a lilting, melodic murmur that seemed to originate from right beside his bed. Chloe sat bolt upright, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Hello?" she whispered into the gloom. No one answered. The room was empty. She shook her head, attributing it to stress and exhaustion. She was hearing things. She had to be. But it happened again the next night, and the night after that. Eleanor heard it too, a woman's voice, speaking too low to make out the words, an intimate, one-sided conversation with her comatose son. They began to stay awake, their fear slowly being eclipsed by a crawling, inexplicable dread. Who was in that room with him, and what were they saying? They questioned the night staff, a kindly older nurse named Brenda, and a young, efficient aide named Mark. Both looked at them with pitying expressions. "It's a stressful time, dear," Brenda had said, patting Eleanor's arm. "The mind plays tricks. You're hearing the nurses at the station, that's all." But they knew it wasn't. The voice was in the room. Determined to prove they weren't going mad, they enlisted the help of Nurse Amy Gallagher. Amy was in her late 30s with sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing, and a no-nonsense demeanor honed by 15 years on the neurology floor. She was a skeptic by nature and profession. She humored them, of course, but her first thought was of an overactive imagination fueled by grief, until she decided to check for herself. She altered her rounds to pass by room 307 at odd hours. For 2 nights she found nothing, just David, silent and still. On the third night, driven by a hunch she couldn't explain, she paused outside his door just after 3 a.m. The hallway was deserted, silent save for the distant beep of another monitor. And then she heard it. A woman's voice, clear and calm, speaking inside David's room. "And you remember the watch, David, the heavy silver one with the worn leather strap. You buried it in the backyard under the old oak tree after the funeral. You were so angry you never wanted to see it again, but you always regretted it." Amy's blood ran cold. She knew about David's father. He had passed away from a sudden heart attack when David was just a boy. But the watch? That was a detail no medical chart contained. She pushed the door open slowly, her clinical mind racing through explanations. A family member they'd missed, a delusional patient who'd wandered in. The room was empty. David lay exactly as he had been. The voice was gone. The only sound was the ventilator's steady hiss. Amy stood frozen, a chill tracing its way down her spine. She had heard it. She was sure of it. But there was no one there. The family wasn't crazy. Something was happening in room 307. This was the moment skepticism curdled into determined curiosity. The next day she approached Eleanor and Chloe. "Tell me everything," she said, her voice low and serious. They did, their words tumbling out in a relieved rush. They told her about the voice that came every night, always around the same time. They told her the things it said. It spoke of a secret crush David had in the 10th grade on a girl named Melissa Cooper. It whispered the exact words of the heartfelt, unsent letter he'd written to his father a year after his death, which he'd kept hidden in a box under his bed. It knew about the $500 loan he'd taken from his friend Jake to cover a gambling debt, a secret he'd sworn Jake to silence over. These weren't just random memories, they were deeply private, specific, and verifiable secrets. Chloe confirmed the letter. A call to Jake confirmed the loan. The watch. Eleanor's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. His father's watch, she breathed. It did go missing after he died. We turned the house upside down. We thought it had been lost in the move. The mystery deepened, becoming a terrifying puzzle. Amy, now completely invested, took a tremendous professional risk. She bought a small, discreet, motion-activated camera from an electronics store. The following evening, after the last family visit and before the night shift change, she entered room 307 on the pretext of adjusting David's IV. With practiced speed, she fixed the tiny camera high on the wall, nestled amongst the cables and wires behind the heart monitor, its lens focused on the space beside David's bed. That night, the vigil was digital. Amy sat in the cramped nurse's break room, her phone synced to the camera's feed, her coffee going cold beside her. The screen showed the familiar, quiet scene, David in his bed, the soft light, the gentle rise and fall of his chest. The timestamp in the corner ticked past 3 a.m., then 3:10. At 3:14, a flicker. The camera's motion sensor activated, and then she was there. One moment the space was empty. The next, a woman stood beside David's bed. There was no door opening, no sound of footsteps. She simply materialized. Amy's breath hitched. The woman, Lena, though no one knew her name yet, was beautiful in an ethereal, unsettling way. She had dark hair that fell in soft waves around her shoulders and pale, almost luminous skin. She wore a simple, dark dress, out of place in the clinical setting. She looked solid, real. She leaned over David, her movements graceful and deliberate. She placed a hand on his forehead, a gesture of intimate tenderness. Then she began to speak, her voice, though soft, perfectly audible on the audio feed. "David," she murmured, her tone soothing yet urgent, "you're getting lost in the noise. You have to find the signal. Remember the lake, the stillness, the way the water held you up." She spoke of a childhood summer at Lake George, a memory so vivid and personal Amy felt like an intruder. Lena spoke of the taste of stolen peaches, the feeling of sun-warmed wood under bare feet, the sound of his father's laughter echoing across the water. She was weaving a tapestry of his life, pulling on threads of peace, joy, and safety. Amy watched, mesmerized and horrified. She rewound the feed. She checked the hallway security camera logs for that exact timestamp. Nothing. The hallway outside room 307 was empty. The main entrance logs showed no one matching her description entering or leaving the floor. It was impossible. Yet the evidence was right there on her phone. The next few nights followed the same pattern. Lena would appear at 3:15 a.m., speak her truths for almost exactly an hour, and then, as the first hint of dawn lightened the sky outside the window, she would fade from view, like mist evaporating in the sun. Amy shared the footage with a stunned Eleanor and Chloe. They watched in silence, tears streaming down their faces. They weren't afraid anymore, they were in awe. This being, whatever she was, wasn't harming David. She was anchoring him. She was using the core memories of his life, the things that defined him, as a lifeline to pull him back from the brink. But the how and the why remained a maddening enigma. Who was she? A ghost tied to him from a past life? A celestial guide? The theories felt inadequate, like trying to catch smoke with their bare hands. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source: Chloe. While everyone was focused on the mystical, Chloe, a psychology major, began researching rare cases of consciousness in comatose patients. She stumbled upon articles and fringe medical theories about extreme psychological phenomena under trauma. She read about dissociative states, about the mind's ability to project itself outside the body as a coping mechanism during near-death experiences. It was often described as an out-of-body experience, but the reports were vague, anecdotal. She combined this with something else Lena had said on the latest recording, a line that had seemed poetic but nonsensical at the time. Lena had said, "The bridge is breaking, David. You built it to escape the pain, but now you can't find your way back. I am the echo of your first thought. I am the map of your mind." An idea, wild and terrifying and brilliant, began to form in Chloe's mind. What if Lena wasn't an external entity at all? What if the answer wasn't in the room, but in the bed? The final piece clicked into place during Lena's next visit. Amy and Chloe watched live from the break room as Lena spoke. This time her words were different. They were less about the past and more about the present. "The body is a room, David," she whispered, her hand still on his forehead. "The doors are locked, but the windows are open. You're outside looking in. You see her, Chloe? She's here. She's your tether. Feel her hand. It's right there. Your hand, my hand." On the screen, Lena lifted her own hand and stared at it, a look of profound confusion on her face. "This is not my hand," she murmured, her voice faltering for the first time. "This is the hand that held the steering wheel. This is the hand that feels the pain." In that moment, Chloe knew. She shot up from her chair, her eyes wide with apocalyptic understanding. She didn't run to the nurse's station. She ran to her brother's room. She burst into room 307 just as Lena, startled, turned towards the door. Their eyes met. Lena's expression was one of panic and sudden, shocking recognition. "David?" Chloe whispered, her voice breaking. The figure of Lena seemed to flicker, like a hologram losing its signal. The beautiful defined features softened, blurred, and for a heart-stopping second, Chloe saw not a strange woman but the ghostly, superimposed image of her brother's face. His eyes, his determined brow, his mouth set in a line of intense concentration. Lena's form dissolved, not with a fade, but with a sudden inward rush, like sand collapsing into itself. And in the bed, David Reed's monitor screamed. A violent electric jolt coursed through his body. His back arched off the mattress. The EKG line, once a steady rhythm, spiked into a chaotic storm of activity. Alarms blared. Nurses, Amy at the forefront, came rushing in. There was a controlled chaos, medication was administered, doctors were called. Chloe stood frozen against the wall, watching, her theory confirmed in the most terrifying way possible. She wasn't scared, she was exhilarated. Lena was never a visitor. She was the visitor. She was David's own consciousness, his soul, his self, whatever you wanted to call it, which had been violently thrown from his body in the accident. Trapped outside, unable to get back in, his mind had somehow given this disembodied self a form. A familiar, comforting, guiding form. Not a ghost, but a guide he created from his own psyche. A psychological lighthouse built from his own memories and essence, designed to lead him home through the storm of his trauma. She knew his secrets because she was his secrets. She was the part of him that remembered, that fought, that wanted to live. She was his will to survive, manifested. The doctors would call it a miraculous neurological event. They would say the surge of autonomic activity had jump-started his brainstem. But Chloe, Eleanor, and Amy knew the truth. The long vigil ended not with a whisper, but with a scream of machinery. Days later, David's eyelids fluttered. A week after that, he was breathing on his own. His recovery was slow, a long road of therapy and confusion. He had no memory of the accident, or of the weeks he spent in the coma. But one afternoon, as Chloe sat reading to him, he stirred, his voice a rough croak. "Chloe?" She dropped the book, grabbing his hand. "I'm here, David." "I'm here." He looked at her, his eyes still hazy with medication and fatigue, but clear with a strange dawning realization. "I had the weirdest dream," he whispered, each word an effort. "There was a woman here, in this room. She had dark hair. She was beautiful. She talked to me." Chloe's heart stopped. "What did she say?" He frowned, trying to grasp the fading memory. She told me things I'd forgotten. About Dad's watch, about the lake." He trailed off, his eyes drifting shut again. Just as she thought he'd fallen back asleep, he spoke again so softly she almost missed it. "She kept calling me David. But in the dream..." He took a shallow, ragged breath. "I was her." He fell into a natural, peaceful sleep. And Chloe finally allowed herself to cry tears of pure, unadulterated relief. The night visitor had completed her mission. She had guided him home. And in doing so, she had given them all something far more valuable than a medical miracle. She had given them a glimpse into the incredible, terrifying, and beautiful power of the human mind to save itself. The greatest mystery wasn't who visited room 307 every night. It was the unexplored universe that lies within each of us, waiting for the moment we have to fight our way back from the dark.